"Don't sign. It's a trap." The words tore through the quiet of the small, snow-covered diner. Rosa Bennett, curly hair spilling wildly, apron stained with coffee, deep brown eyes blazing with fear and fury, stood firm before Julian Carter, a white man in a perfectly tailored black suit, clutching the tablet with the EcoBridge merger contract waiting for his signature. Outside the window, snow fell endlessly, white flakes settling on a gray world. A world where the decisions signed by the rich at these tables would crush hundreds of poor families, thousands of children who hadn't even begun to dream. Julian looked up, his gray eyes cold, the corner of his mouth twitching. Never before had a black waitress dared challenge him like this. But Rosa didn't blink, didn't step back. Her voice was hoarse, each word slicing the air like a blade. "If you sign that, you won't just destroy my family. You'll destroy yourself." A beat of silence. Then Julian's jaw tightened. Outside, the screech of a snowplow echoed down the street, stretching on like a prelude to a storm, not just of winter, but of souls crushed beneath the wheels of power. And this was only the beginning. The dim yellow light of Maple's corner seemed to flicker, casting Rosa's shadow across a wall mottled with damp stains. She hunched over, wiping tables, her calloused hand trembling from the cold. The sun had long set. Snow still pounded outside, but inside Rosa's heart, the storm had been raging for years. The electric bill in her apron pocket stabbed at her like a knife, the red letters screaming, "Last warning, cut off notice." In just a few days, the rickety house where her sick mother lay curled up would freeze. A white hand pressed some loose change tips into Rosa's palm, eyes glancing past her as if seeing a piece of furniture. She gripped the money so tightly her nails dug into her flesh. The sharp pain was easier to bear than the humiliation burning in her chest. From the corner, an old TV blared a short news piece. Horizon Capital is set to acquire EcoBridge, the clean energy program originally founded by a black entrepreneur, soon to be permanently under new ownership. Rosa froze. Her eyes darkened, lips barely moving. "Dad?" A flash of lightning outside lit Rosa's face. Her eyes held not just pain, but a smoldering fire. "And you won't believe what Rosa is about to do to save the last fragile ember of her family." Clara's cough ripped through the air, rough and raspy like sandpaper scraping her lungs. On the creaky bed by the old stove, Rosa's frail mother shivered under a thin blanket, unable to block the cold seeping through every rotting wood plank of the house. Rosa knelt beside her, gently patting her back, her eyes a storm of worry. Clara looked up at her daughter, lips curving faintly, her cloudy eyes still burning with the same defiant fire that had carried her through a lifetime of storms, of racism, poverty, sickness. "Don't let them break you, Rosa." Clara's voice was paper-thin, chasing after what might be her last breath. "They can bend you, weigh you down, but don't let them snap you." Rosa swallowed hard, a hot tear sliding onto Clara's hand. She bowed her head into those aging, freckled hands. Hands that once cradled her in the dark, shielded her from contemptuous stares on the street. Outside, the snow kept falling, eerily silent. In that hush, Rosa's eyes sparked with a reckless resolve she wasn't even sure she was brave enough to carry out. The front door swung open, blasting the tiny living room with a biting gust of wind. Vernon strode in, shiny leather coat, a bright red scarf at his throat, keys jingling in hand like he was flaunting trophies. His smile was wide but never reached his eyes, which glittered with greedy appraisal as they swept over the shabby room. "Well, my little Rosa," Vernon sneered, blowing cigarette smoke her way. "Still here nursing that dying old woman? Don't you know there's a chance out there to change your life forever?" Rosa clenched her fists, forcing calm breaths. The stink of cheap tobacco mixed with damp snow made her stomach twist. Vernon pulled out his wallet, slid a few $50 bills into Rosa's apron pocket. "Consider that your mother's medicine tonight, but you know what you've got to do to really earn it, right?" Rosa stiffened, pulled the money out, and threw it to the floor. Vernon just smirked, stooped to pick it up, dusted it off like it was nothing, then looked up with eyes glinting in challenge. He pulled a stack of papers from his inside pocket, slapped them on the table. Carter. Horizon Capital. EcoBridge. Ring a bell? All you have to do is dig up a few details from him. Your mom gets her meds, I get my investment. We all crawl out of this rotten neighborhood. Rosa stared at him, chest heaving, lips pressed bloodless. Vernon's eyes sharpened, his voice dropping to a hiss, slithering like a snake through grass. Or, let your mother slowly die in that busted bed because of your precious pride. The room seemed to darken, like the oil lamp wavering under a poison wind waiting right outside the door. The next morning, Rosa trudged down the main street of the black neighborhood, her worn-out boots squelching through grimy gray slush. Tiny grocery stores and barber shops huddled together, peeling signs, windows fogged with breath, eyes from inside watching. Weary, wary, unable to hide their exhaustion. At an intersection, a white woman in a luxurious fur coat stepped out of a shiny SUV. The moment her eyes met Rosa's, she clutched her purse tighter, recoiled half a step, gaze flashing fear and suspicion. Rosa halted, a tight squeeze in her chest, then forced herself to keep moving, shoulders sinking further under the invisible weight she'd carried all her life, her skin. Across the street, two little black boys shoved each other, giggling under frosty breaths. Rosa stopped, watching them, a painful knot closing her throat. They were too innocent to understand that as they grew, those fearful eyes would never disappear just because they smiled. Suddenly, a sleek black car screeched to a stop in front of Maple's corner. The door swung open. Julian Carter stepped out, overcoat speckled with snow, gray hair streaked with melting drops sliding down his neck. His eyes scanned the street, indifferent, icy, as if this was just another pit stop between countless bloodless deals he'd made all his life. Rosa stepped into Maple's corner and spotted Julian alone at a corner table, tablet before him, screen casting a pale blue light across his face. His gray eyes flicked over the figures, then paused on the bold headline, EcoBridge Acquisition. Final Terms. Rosa's heart clenched. The hand holding her order pad shook. EcoBridge. The name sliced lightly over her skin, leaving a cold trail. It wasn't just a clean energy project. It was her father's unfinished dream, hope for these dark alleys, the reason Daniel Bennett poured out his life building it, before dying in an accident everyone called strange. Julian frowned slightly, fingers tapping a rhythm on the table. For a moment, something like hesitation passed over his razor-sharp features, but then his lips tightened, eyes returned to calm, the eyes of a man who'd learned to put profit above everything, even human lives. Rosa swallowed, drew a breath, stepped toward him. As the distance shrank to mere feet, she felt her heart pound wildly, as if her very body warned, if you speak, your life will never be the same again. Coffee? Rosa asked softly, her voice breaking among the clinking silverware. Julian didn't look up, merely nodded, eyes glued to the tablet like he was hypnotized by the billions flashing across it. She set the cup before him, the bitter aroma mingling with the biting air. But instead of walking away, Rosa stood there, hands twisting the dish towel into a wrinkled mess. "Don't sign," she blurted, her voice almost cracking. "It's a trap." Julian froze. His gray eyes slowly drifted from the screen, lifting to meet Rosa's. For an instant, the room seemed to hush, all other sounds fading. His face registered brief shock. No black waitress had ever dared look at him with such bold eyes. "Excuse me?" Julian's voice grated low and heavy, metal striking stone. Rosa swallowed the fear rising to choke her. Her deep brown eyes did not blink, flames inside them flickering like a dare against the storm outside. Both their worlds, hers and his, were about to be ripped apart in ways neither could foresee. Julian tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "So, tell me, Rosa, what trap do you think I'm signing on to?" He pressed her name like he was grinding it beneath his tongue. The space seemed to tighten. A few scattered customers began to glance over, sensing a storm brewing. Not of snow, but something much colder. an uncompromising collision of power and desperation. Rosa drew a breath, chest rising. Don't you see? You're about to sign off on buying out the dreams of an entire community, then sell them off piece by piece for numbers you think will fill the emptiness inside you. Julian leaned on his elbows, tapping a finger, eyes locked on her. So, you expect me to sacrifice millions of dollars for feelings? No, Rosa said, voice trembling but sharp as glass. Not for feelings, or for what's right. Because someday you'll have to ask yourself, are you a man who has everything, or just someone so lonely he has to buy pieces of other people's souls to stuff into his own hollow? Julian was silent, jaw clenched. Have you ever wondered, if you could have all the money in the world but had to crush others' dreams to get it, would you still sign? Leave your answer in the comments below. Rosa stepped out of the diner, cold smacking her face, making her shiver. Snow blanketed the sidewalk, soaking into her worn shoes, freezing her toes. But Rosa barely felt it over the wild hammering of her heart. She'd done what no one in this neighborhood dared, stood before a powerful white billionaire and told him he was wrong. It wasn't foolishness, it was suicide. At least for her future, her chances of escaping this cycle. Crossing the narrow street home, Rosa paused outside the barber shop. In the window's reflection, she saw herself, shabby coat, curly hair tousled by the wind, eyes dark with sleepless worry. She looked like nothing that could move an empire, nothing that could make Julian Carter pause. But when Rosa placed a hand on her chest over her racing heart, she reminded herself Clara was still alive, still needed warmth. And her father, Daniel Bennett, left more than a company. He left a legacy of belief. Rosa's lips pressed tight, eyes sparking with a reckless light. No matter who Julian Carter was, no matter how tomorrow might crash down like a sharpened blade, she would not take another step back. The rickety wooden door flew open, a frigid gust whistling down the narrow hall. Vernon lounged on a worn chair, legs crossed, leather jacket dusted with melting snowflakes on his shoulders. His eyes swept the room, stopping on Rosa standing stiff near the door, hands still trembling, whether from the cold or from what she'd just said to Julian Carter. How'd the little chat go? Vernon squinted, his thin smile revealing yellowed teeth. Rosa avoided his gaze, hurried to the kitchen, fumbling in a cabinet. But Vernon didn't let her flee. He sprang up, heavy steps creaking the floor, stopping right behind her. "Don't you play games with me, girl?" His voice dropped to a rough whisper, tobacco breath hot on her neck. "Carter's a gold mine. All you gotta do is dig up a few papers, a few details. Your mom gets the best medicine. I'll handle the rest." Rosa closed her eyes, gripping the counter until her knuckles went white. Vernon leaned close, voice nearly a hiss. "Or you'd rather watch Clara slowly die on that torn-up bed, all for your useless pride." The air seemed sucked out of the room. Rosa slowly turned, eyes no longer fearful. Now something closer to hatred burned there. But Vernon only sneered, hands slipping into his pockets, whistling as he strolled out, leaving behind the stench of cigarettes mixed with the threat seeping into every corner of the house. Rosa sat slumped on the living room floor, back against an old wooden cabinet, hands trembling as she opened a frayed photo album. Under the weak yellow lamp, faded photos appeared like tiny windows into a world long gone. There was her father, Daniel Bennett, standing in front of the Eco-Bridge sign on opening day, his slightly oversized brown suit, eyes shining like the sun rising after a long winter. Beside him was Clara, young, hair pinned up high, her smile blooming like a rose in the snow. And little Rosa, just a child, clinging to her father's leg, wide-eyed, believing the world was good as long as grown-up hands held it steady. Rosa's finger traced the photo, feeling the rough old plastic, a painful reminder that all of it was gone. Her father died in a mysterious car accident not long after refusing to sell Eco-Bridge to big corporations. Eco-Bridge then fell into other hands, gutted, turned into a commodity instead of the dream to lift black neighborhoods out of darkness. A tear splashed onto her father's face in the photo, smearing it faintly. Rosa slammed the album shut, her hand shaking on the hard cover. The air seemed to shrink around her, waiting for an explosion whose force even she couldn't yet imagine. The door chime at Maple's corner jingled again, making Rosa jump and drop her rag to the floor. Her heart leapt to her throat when she saw Julian Carter walk in. His black overcoat dusted with snow, his face more gaunt than the day before, deep gray eyes sweeping the diner like he was searching for something he'd accidentally lost. Rosa bent down to pick up the rag, trying to avoid his gaze, but she wasn't fast enough. "Miss Bennett." Julian's voice came, deep and cold, forcing her to look up. He didn't say waitress, like always, no honey, no darling, none of the cheap words customers threw at her. Julian used her real name, the name of Daniel Bennett's daughter, the child once hoisted on shoulders during EcoBridge's first inauguration. Rosa's heart clenched. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles went white. Julian's breath came out in frosty puffs. He pulled off his gloves, placed the tablet on the table, like laying down a gun. "Bring me coffee," he ordered, his voice hoarse. But then his eyes briefly cracked, just for a heartbeat, so quick Rosa almost wasn't sure she'd seen it. She turned, trying to steady her trembling legs. Julian's eyes stayed locked on her back, and neither of them knew that just one more sentence could send everything spinning far beyond their control. Rosa set the coffee cup on the table with hands that trembled slightly, her posture still bent as if ready to retreat at any second. Julian didn't touch the coffee. He leaned back, gray eyes drilling into her in a terrifying silence. "EcoBridge," he said, tasting each syllable like a foreign dish. "Do you know what it was before it became just another investment toy for us?" Rosa looked up, meeting Julian's gaze head-on, like two blades crossing in a snowstorm. "Of course I do," she rasped, her voice raw from pain, long buried. It was light for streets swallowed in darkness, hope for kids who didn't have to do homework by candlelight. My father's promise. That skin color wouldn't decide who deserves warmth. Julian's mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. It was something twisted, confused, as if he didn't understand the feeling rising in his own chest. "A promise?" Julian repeated, his voice rumbling low, hand clutching the tablet until his knuckles went white. "And what did I inherit besides my father's debts to so-called justice? Who paid for all that?" The air between them vibrated with expensive, bitter memories. Rosa blinked, her heart thudding hard, realizing maybe the man in front of her wasn't entirely the monster she believed. But was such a tiny crack enough to shatter the frozen walls trapping Julian Carter's heart? Julian lowered his head, fingers tapping the cup, a tiny sound that cracked sharply in the quiet diner. A rush of hot blood surged up Rosa's neck. She took a deep breath, then suddenly slammed both hands on the table, leaning in, her deep brown eyes lit with a fire Julian couldn't look away from. "You know why you're still alone, Julian?" Rosa's voice cut like a thin blade. "Because all those numbers, those balance sheets, they'll never thank you. They don't care about your eyes. They won't cry if you drop dead on a pile of dollars." Julian lifted his gaze, cold eyes flickering, the corner of his mouth twitching. "So, what do you want, Rosa? Want me to cradle black kids on the street and weep? Want me to kneel before your father's dream? Go ahead, sign Julian. Then look in the mirror tomorrow and see if you even recognize the man staring back." Julian's eyes snapped shut for a moment, his hand tightening on the tablet so hard his fingers went bloodless. That fear wasn't something Rosa invented. It had always been in Julian's heart, waiting for someone to drag it into the light. Rosa shook her head, a tear of furious sorrow slipping free. "No, I just want you to stop, before you become exactly what my father feared most, a breathing corpse, no soul left inside." The words cracked across Julian like a whip. His shoulders jerked, hand digging into the tablet until his nails bit deep into pale skin. In that instant, Rosa saw something flare in those ice-gray eyes. Not anger, but a raw, primal terror. And that might be the only clue left to pull Julian Carter back into the light. That night, Julian sat alone behind the wheel of his luxury car parked by the curb, breath fogging into a thin layer on the window. He stared out at the cold streets, where faded street lamps cast long shadows of black kids kicking a battered ball, laughing without knowing their futures could vanish with a single signature. Julian's hand trembled slightly on the steering wheel, the crease in his forehead deep. Rosa's voice replayed in his head, more haunting than anything that had ever stalked him. "Before you become a corpse, with no soul left." Julian squeezed his eyes shut, and suddenly his father, Henry Carter, appeared vividly. A man with salt and pepper hair, hands greasy from engine oil, who used to sit at the old garage table saying simple things Julian in his youth never bothered to hear. "Julian, you can't measure people by payrolls. You can be rich, you can win, but one day, when it all leaves you, the only thing that'll matter is how you treated them." Julian's lips pressed tight, jaw twitching. A heavy truck blared its horn as it sped past, spraying dirty snow over his hood, jolting him, his hands clamping the wheel white-knuckled. When he opened his eyes again, Julian realized his heart was pounding oddly fast, as if it, too, feared what he was about to face, and what might be lost forever. The house was deathly still except for Clara's labored wheezing, each breath sounding like threads being pulled from the last tether holding her to life. Rosa sat at the edge of the bed, hand on her mother's chest, feeling it struggle to rise, then sink weakly. "I'm still here, Mama," Rosa whispered, her voice cracking. But Clara didn't open her eyes, dry, cracked lips only moving slightly with words that never formed. The flickering oil lamp threw shadows across her gaunt, bony face, as if the night itself was slowly eating her away. Rosa bowed her head, tears splashing onto Clara's age-spotted hand. A simmering panic clawed inside her. If her mother slipped away tonight, all the sacrifices, all the vows would shatter into useless shards. Outside the window, the wind howled, rattling the panes violently. Rosa squeezed her mother's hand tighter, pressing her cheek to skin that grew steadily colder, afraid that letting go even for a second would let Clara be whisked away by the storm. Rosa's eyes flew wide, reflecting the lamp's frail flame. In that moment, a reckless thought blazed up, burning hotter than any fear that had ever weighed on her shoulders. Vernon's hand slammed down on the kitchen table, making the cheap ceramic cups rattle. He leaned close to Rosa, breath heavy with cigarettes and booze blasting into her face. "You gonna let your mama starve for real, Rosa?" Vernon growled, irritation crackling as his prey proved too stubborn. "One night. Just soften up to Carter a little, bring back a few papers. You save her, you save yourself." Rosa stood tall, shoulders trembling slightly but her eyes never flinching. "Save? By selling my soul to you? To all the filth you're dragging me into?" Vernon barked a laugh, harsh and splintered like an old door wrenched off its hinges. "Rosa, white folks only respect you when you're on your knees in front of them. I'm giving you a chance to get a seat next to them. You understand?" Rosa's eyes ignited with fierce hatred. That sentence burned away every last thought of compromise. Her lips pressed into a hard line, hands hanging at her sides clenching so tight her nails dug deep into her skin. Vernon saw her face, sneered, gave her shoulder a mocking pat as if granting a favor, then left, the kitchen sinking into silence, where Rosa stood like tempered steel, her resolve gone cold and sharp as iron forged through fire. Horizon Capital's headquarters blazed like a glass fortress in the night, each pane reflecting city lights in blinding luxury. Julian sat silently at the far end of a long conference table, only a desk lamp illuminating the papers before him, casting a cold beam across his weary face. His fingers slowly turned each page. On the last one, standing out among all the indifferent lines of lawyers and advisors, were 3 words Julian couldn't push from his mind. Daniel Bennett Foundation. A chill sliced down his spine. When he was a boy, Julian once walked hand in hand with his father, Henry Carter, past the first lit-up EcoBridge sign in the slums. Henry had stopped, squeezed young Julian's shoulder, pointing at the humble building with eyes that shone. "Look, son, that's not just power, not just technology. That's belief. That's how people save each other from the dark." Julian squeezed his eyes shut, hand unconsciously gripping the table's edge until it blanched. The gap between the father who preached justice and the man about to sign away that very legacy was now paper-thin, yet sharp as a blade ready to sever his conscience. Outside, car horns wailed, slicing the air like alarms for something barreling down on him, unstoppable. Julian shoved his chair back, standing abruptly, breath ragged as if he'd run a long way. He paced the room, hand raking through graying hair, each footstep pounding the wooden floor, echoing with the frantic beat of his heart. On the table, the tablet still glowed, the EcoBridge buyout contract in the e-signature box waiting for a single tap. One tap, just one. Years of climbing, veins bled dry for ruthless deals. It would all keep feeding the empire he built on the ashes of his father's ideals. But right then, Rosa's face blazed into his mind. Those tear-bright brown eyes, her trembling voice like a knife slicing straight into him. "Before you become a corpse with no soul left." Julian braced both hands on the table, bending so close his forehead nearly touched the cold glass. Primal fear rose up, not of losing money or power, but because for the first time he had to face the monster he'd let grow in the dark inside him. Outside, snowflakes drifted against the windows, shattering, like hundreds of tiny souls screaming for him not to crush their last hope. Julian's eyes flew open, heart skipping a beat, ready for a choice that could destroy everything. Or redeem whatever small piece of humanity still survived inside him. In the pitch-dark house, Rosa sat motionless at the edge of the bed, her cold hands tightly clasping Clara's. Her mother's breaths came in shallow, rasping pulls, each one tearing through the silence like claws scraping at Rosa's heart. On a rickety wooden table just steps away, the medicine bottle lay empty, cap flipped open, silently bearing witness to the invisible noose tightening around their family. Rosa looked down at her mother's face. Eyes shut, sockets sunken deep, skin darkened by relentless pain left unchecked by medicine. Just hours earlier, Vernon had hissed in her ear that all he needed was one piece of information, one signature from Julian. In return, Clara would get the best drugs, the warmest hospital room, the cleanest bed. Rosa swallowed hard, hot tears falling onto Clara's hand, vanishing into skin that was growing steadily colder. In that moment, Rosa heard herself whisper inside, "Is it truly wrong to sell your conscience if it saves the person you love most?" Tell Rosa what you think. If it were you, standing before the life of someone you love, would you abandon every principle you hold? Yes or no? The room stayed silent, filled only by Clara's labored, broken breathing, as if waiting for Rosa's own chest to answer. Rosa braced her hands on the bathroom sink, lifting her face to stare straight into the mirror. The dim yellow light revealed her gaunt features, dark circles under her eyes, and lips bitten until they bled. Her breath fogged the glass with a thin mist that slowly cleared, exposing eyes both exhausted and burning with rage, drilling into her own reflection. She could still hear Vernon's words, echoing like a curse. "Tonight, you decide it all." Rosa's hand clenched into a fist on the porcelain, knuckles turning white. She pictured her mother lying there, shivering, and a part of her screamed, "Just a few lies, one paper, and she'll be saved." But then Rosa's gaze locked onto her father's eyes in an old photo taped to the mirror. Daniel Bennett, still calmly smiling in a faded shirt, eyes filled with hope she feared she could no longer carry. Rosa gritted her teeth, voice a raw whisper only she could hear. "No, I won't trade my mother's life for killing my father's soul all over again." She splashed cold water onto her face, the chill piercing her mind, drowning the chaos threatening to explode. When Rosa lifted her head again, her eyes had changed. Deeper, colder, blazing with a fierce resolve and a plan even she couldn't predict the end of. On the 45th floor of Horizon Capital's towering office, Julian stood pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window, staring down at the city sinking into darkness. The streets glittered with lights, proud skyscrapers rising in the night, like a giant toy model he could topple with the lightest touch. A phone rang, slicing through the dead silence with an icy edge. Julian picked it up, his large hand trembling slightly, fingertips digging into the metal casing. "Call the entire board," he said, voice low and firm like a judge's gavel. "Tonight. I won't wait for morning." On the other end, his assistant's voice caught. "Mr. Carter, what's so urgent that you'd summon them in the middle of a snowstorm?" Julian turned away, the light casting jagged shadows across his face, like deep ravines he'd been running from his whole life. "Because, if I wait till morning, I won't have the courage to do what's right." He dropped the phone on the desk, exhaling heavily, eyes hardening. Like a man stepping into a battle he knew he would almost certainly lose. In Horizon Capital's boardroom, the air filled with the heavy rustle of papers and laptops snapping shut, cold white lights glaring on rows of tense faces, mostly older men in impeccable suits, eyes flashing irritation and contempt. Julian stood at the head of the table, hands pressed on the dark wood, staring down each of them in turn. The overhead light carved deep hollows around his eyes, jaw clenched, veins taut at his temple. "Gentlemen," he began, voice hoarse as if crawling out of a long fever, "the EcoBridge acquisition will not proceed the way we planned. I have a different path," a CFO snorted, giving a dry, dismissive laugh. "A different path? You mean dropping this? The cleanest profit we'll see all quarter?" Another slammed his hand on the table. "Julian, do you know how much shareholder money is tied up in this deal? They'll tear us apart if you tank it at the last minute." Julian's hands whitened, knuckles straining. Then he drew a deep breath, lifted his head high, a spark of defiance in his eye. "I'm ready to let them do exactly that," he said, each word a hiss through his teeth. "Because if destroying a legacy meant to serve the community is what it takes for you to see pretty numbers on your statements, then each of you had better ask how much humanity you've got left." The room fell dead silent for a heartbeat, then erupted. Chairs scraping, papers tossed down, voices barking in outrage. But Julian's gray eyes didn't waver, didn't blink, like a man who'd chosen a path with no way back. Julian slammed his hands on the conference table, the sharp sound cracking off the cold glass walls. All the angry voices, the threats about tanking stock prices, lawsuits from investors, fell silent in an instant. His gray eyes swept the room, slow and deliberate, forcing each man to meet a stare that seemed to drill into them, down to where they still buried scraps of conscience. "I spent my whole life building Horizon into the empire that lets you sit here, puffing cigars and boasting to your friends." Julian's voice dropped, each word hitting like a heavy stone. "But not one of you ever asked, how many families did we crush to pile these numbers on your desk?" An older director squinted, let out a harsh chuckle. "That's not our concern, Julian. This world runs on winners and the buried." Julian leaned forward again, hands gripping the table, voice strained with held-back fury. "Then today, I choose not to be the one doing the burying. Even if I lose everything, I will not sign to kill one more dream." He straightened, exhaled sharply, his face like it was carved from stone. Around him, the million-dollar suits buzzed with anger, eyes sparking, ready to throw Julian off the throne he'd built himself. But deep in those eyes flickered something else. Fear. Fear of a man who had nothing left to lose. In the cramped kitchen that smelled of damp mold, Rosa set a thick file down in front of the police officer. Her hands trembled violently, red from cold, gripping the table edge like she feared she might snatch it back. The officer, a black man with deep lines etched beside his mouth, opened the file, flipping through pages. Wire transfers, personal debt ledgers, faded invoices, all exposing the dirty little fraud web Vernon had spun for years. Rosa clenched her jaw, breath coming fast. Her eyes drifted to the bedroom door where Clara slept, unaware her daughter had just placed their entire bloodline into the hands of the law. "Are you sure?" the officer asked, voice low, eyes no longer cold. "This man. He's your uncle." Rosa swallowed, shoulders shaking. A tear gathered but didn't fall. "He chose his path," she whispered. "Now I'm choosing mine." The officer gave a small nod, shutting the file, his face flickering with a strange kind of respect. Outside, sirens wailed as the car carting Vernon away rolled down the alley, shattering the long stillness of their neighborhood. Rosa stood by the window, heart twisting, not sure if she'd just saved her family or broken it forever. The Horizon Capitol building still blazed with light, but this time there was no cheerful chatter from shareholders. Julian sat at the head of the table, a document before him, not a buyout contract but a restructuring plan for EcoBridge. No longer a project to slice up and sell, it was a promise to restore its true mission: clean power for impoverished Black communities. His hand froze on the silver pen, breath heavy. For a split second, memories of his father returned. Henry Carter's gentle face, eyes bright when he spoke of justice, of the only real winners being all of us. Julian leaned back, as if listening for that warm laugh lost to this world long ago. When he opened his eyes again, they were clearer than ever. He signed with a firm stroke. It felt like pulling a knife from his chest, painful, hollow, yet strangely lighter. The door swung open, his assistant's eyes widening at the stamped papers. Julian only gave a small nod. EcoBridge is no longer for sale. From now on, it lights the places it was born to light. Beyond the glass, the city glimmered like a carpet of stars. For the first time in years, Julian didn't feel like the predator who ruled it, but a man who'd just risked everything to reclaim the last piece of his soul. Morning light streamed through the dusty windows of Maple's Corner, gilding the tabletops. Rosa walked in, hair loose and messy, eyes dark from sleepless nights, but deep inside them gleamed a light that hadn't been there through all the years of poverty and fear. Julian was already seated at their usual table, no expensive suit now, sleeves of a blue shirt rolled up, gray eyes tired but holding a strange relief. When Rosa approached, he stood, sliding a thin folder toward her. Her heart raced. Her hands shook as she opened it, eyes catching the title, Community Project Director, EcoBridge, Rosa Bennett. You're joking, right? Rosa's voice cracked, tangled between shock, doubt, and an emotion too big to name. "No," Julian answered softly, gaze locked on her, so deep it seemed to rise from his chest. "You'll lead this, Rosa. Bring EcoBridge back to the dream your father talked about. I don't want a name to decorate it. I need someone who truly understands why it exists." Rosa's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling. Julian slowly reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. In that moment, in silence filled only by their breathing, a new pact was signed, not with ink, but with a fragile trust exchanged between two hearts that had nearly turned to stone. Soft morning sun filled the small room, slipping through frayed curtains. Clara lay propped against pillows, breathing steadier now, her cheeks etched with delicate lines like fragile paper. Rosa sat beside her, clutching her mother's hand, still trembling from emotion. On her knee lay the official appointment letter, Horizon Capital's red seal raised proudly. Proof that their family, people once only allowed to hide at society's bottom, had just been invited into the light. Clara's eyes fluttered open, lips twitching into a faint smile. "You're crying?" she rasped, breath like a wooden flute with cracks. "No." Rosa laughed through tears, shaking her head. "I just can't believe how much has changed." Clara lifted a frail hand to Rosa's cheek. "Your father, he must be so proud," she whispered, a tear sliding slowly down her wrinkled skin. "And I am too." Rosa's heart clenched, flooded with a sweetness and ache she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. She squeezed Clara's hand, eyes drifting to the window where sunlight still poured in, not promising a perfect day, but at least one warmer than the last. And somewhere deep inside, Rosa knew this moment was only the beginning of everything she still had to do. Children's laughter rang through the courtyard of the newly opened community center, tiny feet racing over tiles still smelling of fresh paint. A brass sign gleamed in the sun at the gate. Daniel Bennett Community Lab, a place to ignite dreams. Rosa stood on the second-floor balcony, hands on the railing, watching solar lamps blaze bright along two streets. Black mothers holding babies lingered under the lights, hesitant smiles finally blooming wide. Boys kicked a soccer ball, no longer dodging potholes cloaked in darkness or fearing hidden muggers. Julian stepped up beside Rosa, no longer the arrogant billionaire. He stood silent, arms crossed, eyes following the children, as if reliving summers of youth he had missed. "You did it," Julian said softly, not quite praise, more a quiet reminder of the power Rosa had once doubted in herself. Rosa turned, her brown eyes catching the sun, shining with a light long buried. "No," she whispered. "We did." Below, a little girl looked up at them, her dark eyes brimming with hope, reflecting a future she'd never dared dream. Rosa gripped the railing, knowing this was only the first step down a long road she was determined to see to the end. Rosa sat on a wooden bench outside the center, hand in hand with Clara. Together, they watched rows of solar lamps spark to life, light spilling out like tiny stars across a neighborhood once filled only with shadows and fear. Clara smiled weakly, laying her thin hand over Rosa's. "See, Rosa, there's still room for light in this world, if someone's brave enough to kindle it." A hot tear rolled down Rosa's cheek. She leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, hearing Clara breathe deep and steady, like she finally believed everything might truly be okay. Rosa looked up, eyes glistening, whispering to herself, "These lights aren't just for our roof. They're so anyone can find their way through the night." Then she turned, looking straight into the camera, breaking the story's wall, her voice shaking but firm, cutting right into the viewer's heart. "If someone out there is lost, don't be afraid to say, 'Don't sign,' because that one sentence could save an entire world." A gentle breeze drifted by, children still laughing under the lights. Their clear voices rose, ringing out to prove Rosa's words weren't just a dream, but hope, truly burning bright. And if you're watching this video, don't hesitate to leave a like, share it with someone you believe needs hope too, and subscribe to help us spread more stories that touch the soul.